Hi there and welcome back to Does It Hold Up, a series where we take a look at classic RPGs to see how they compare to their modern counterparts. This time it's the PS1 game from Konami, Suikoden 1. Genso Suikoden 1, to give its full title, was developed in 1995, taking reportedly 2 years to create, around 1 year after the console was brought to the market, and making it one of the first RPGs on the platform. But does that make it good? To make a 12-minute video short? No. No, it does not. Suikoden 1 suffers from a multitude of problems that make it seem more like a phone game by today's standards than a full console release. And whilst it does have good points, most of these are because of the ease of the mechanics and the fact it's so short. The Suikoden hardcore are probably hovering over the comments section now, so let me explain before I get downvoted to oblivion. Let's start with the story, shall we? A good story in an RPG can make almost any other downsides worth it, weaving its plots and revealing its characters to smooth over any cracks a game may otherwise have. Unfortunately, Suikoden's cracks are so obvious it may as well be mooning its audience and dancing around on stage with its pants around its ankles, for all the subtlety of its plot. You play Tyr McDowell, son of the famous General Teo McDowell, who gloriously serves Emperor Barbarossa for the Scarlet Moon Empire. Being the great dad that he is summoned to meet said emperor and decides to bring you along. In doing so, you're convinced to join the Empire and do some work, since before then I guess you were just hanging out like some sort of hedge fund douchebag in the family mansion. After 2 missions, your friend Ted makes the mistake of revealing himself to have the Soul Eater rune, using the magic abilities it possesses to save your life, but also bringing its existence to the knowledge of your corrupt bosses within the Empire. Sounds pretty good so far, right? And apart from a few spelling mistakes in the translation, it is. Until then. Ted is captured, escapes, hands over the rune to you, and is captured again. And isn't spoken of for another 10 hours. Is he dead? Nobody knows. He might as well have not existed for all he's spoken of. But because you helped Ted, you're branded the traitor and have to go on the run, and before long seeking the help of the Liberation Army. We do this instead of going to Daddy for help, by the way. Remember Teo McDowell, the most famous general in the Empire, who is good friends with the head honcho Barbarossa, and could probably make this whole thing disappear with a single letter. Anyway, we somehow end up being given a top secret mission for the Liberation Army, who we haven't decided to join yet, by the way, and are entrusted with blueprints to a weapon that will be important later on. Some things happen after that and we inexplicably become the leader of the resistance organization. You know, the guys who are in direct opposition to your father? It's like your character just woke up and chose chaos, choosing to join Al-Qaeda because your dad went on a business trip instead of giving us his MasterCard and keys to his Merc. The rest of the game covers how we go around the country, recruiting characters, and basically bringing to the attention of everyone how the Empire are probably the baddies. Quick question. Has there ever been an organisation that calls itself the Empire who haven't been the baddies? Comments down below. Speaking of recruiting characters, by the way, Suikoden 1 does a ton of that, with 108 characters available to pick and join your army. That sounds a lot, I hear you say, and it is. It also means that each of their backstories and plotlines are stretched paper thin. I get why Konami would go for this epic number of characters. CDs were brand new in video games, with their superior storage space over cartridges making all kinds of new things possible. But instead of making an expansive story, focusing on a small number of well-established heroes, they went the other way, flooding the game with daytime TV plots and narratives that are very cliché, and even some that are frankly ridiculous. That's not to say that all 108 storylines are a waste of time though. Some more major characters are given decent backstory, like Matthew, a teacher who is very good at being a wartime strategist, but absolutely hates himself for it. And Victor, a Han Solo type that should have been the protagonist, honestly, instead of Tyr, who barely speaks except to make choices that aren't choices. This is another thing that Suikoden does that thankfully developers seem to have learned from, and very rarely do these days. Most recently, Triangle Strategy did a great job of providing vastly different outcomes based on your non-silent protagonist's choices, which helped improve your investment in the world it creates. Suikoden 1 goes in the wrong direction most times and makes little to no effort to provide you with any choices at all. As I said at the beginning, the thing Suikoden 1 does best with its story is keep it short. Whilst I've played the game a few times now, my playtime was coming up to 20 hours in the final sections, making it one of the shortest RPGs I've ever played, and one of the reasons that it's so short is due to its combat mechanics. The majority of combat in Suikoden is done with your party of 6 versus the enemy's numbers taking place on a pseudo 3D field, with turn order decided by the speed stat. That sounds pretty standard stuff, right? And it is. If not for the camera position and the pans and zooms that happen to give some tension to the proceedings, this could be a Final Fantasy clone. Except that Final Fantasy has buffs and debuffs. Alright, well, Suikoden 1 does have a buff, but only one rune type can do it, it's limited cast, and honestly you don't need to. The game is so easy you really shouldn't need to ever use it. Most modern RPGs have complex systems to try and engage its audience into keeping their brains switched on and avoiding the dreaded play whilst watching something else or listening to a podcast in the background disaster from happening. Suikoden 1 doesn't. It is so much of that the only way it could be more podcast friendly is if it had on-screen prompts for when the next story beat was coming up so you could pause what you're listening to. The hardcore fans might well point to status effects and the delightful sprite animations that are given to those afflicted, but they only happen in standard mob fights, and even then the game seems to do everything in its power to make sure those are supremely easy for you. You can even recruit Tyr's training instructor Kai early on so that you can perform the Master Pupil attack, which strikes every opponent on screen and cannot miss. This is usually enough to one-shot the entire mob, making combat with anything that isn't an upside-down floating demon boy or a giant clam completely trivial. It's as if the development staff were terrified that you wouldn't continue the game if you weren't absolutely wrecking everything in your wake. This ease continues into the other types of combat in the game too, with major battles boiling down to a side-on 2D fight, decided with rock-paper-scissors mechanics of charges, bows, and magic attacks. To make this easier, the game gives you a multitude of options for figuring out what the enemy's attack will be, so you will always have the perfect counter ready and waiting. Even the one-on-one duels follow patterns with tells, as each opponent says something to you before their next action, giving you a clue as to how to smash their faces in. At least some of these are cryptic and not completely straightforward, offering some resistance to your resistance. Nope, combat in Suikoden 1 is a breeze. There are only 2 opponents you should absolutely be aware of if you wish to play this game. This guy, no matter how much you grind, no matter how high your strength stat is, he will not be moved, and there is nothing you can do to change that. Okay, well, seriously though, the only guy I had any trouble with was Gaspar. Gaspar is the true gatekeeper for this game, holding your fate in his dice-throwing hand as you play a weird dice ball game that looks like it should be taking place down a back alley with my spleen on the line should I lose. Yes, Suikoden 1 has a gambling game in it, that you can use to earn, or lose, your hard-earned cash on. It's also the easiest way to break the game, as everything can be made better with money. Shocker. Sharpening your weapons and buying better armor is the easy way to beat the game, and Gaspar is the key to getting them. Every time you win a round against him, Gaspar will offer double or nothing to you, which can quickly end up maxing your cash out. It's limited to under $1 million, which sucks in hindsight. Of course, whilst you can quickly make a buttload of gold, you can also lose it, meaning in my case, a bunch of save scumming to ensure he never won a damn round in the entire playthrough. But this was also the most frustrating thing I encountered in the game, since it's very much a random event each time. That's not to say that was my only option though. I could have grinded cash from enemy encounters, but that most likely would have doubled my playtime, which would have led to a different frustration. Boredom. Remember me saying that the game belongs on a phone? This is one of the main reasons. The gameplay is so shallow that it quickly becomes tiresome, and the main thing that keeps me playing is seeing new characters you can recruit, which is very similar to many of these hero games, where you're playing to see the next drop and seeing if it's rare or not. At least modern phone games are flashier with this. You open a chest or a waifu drops her pants or something. In Suikoden, you see them and walk up to them. That's pretty much the crux of how I feel about Suikoden 1. It doesn't hold up, I'm afraid. I'm hoping that Suikoden 2 does better. It's the most beloved of the series, but I've never played it. I should probably change that. But before we go, a couple of things I want to address. Dragons do not sound like elephants. They're mythical creatures and no one has ever seen one or heard one, but I know they don't sound like that. You're given 2 support item slots and can equip 2 of the same item. Can I equip 2 pairs of boots? Or when I equip 1, am I only wearing 1 boot? Discuss. Speaking of equipment, moving around items is maybe the worst I've ever seen in an RPG. You're inexplicably given 9 slots of inventory space per character, up to 5 of which can be taken up with armor and support items, leaving you 4 slots open for additional equipment. You cannot go over this limit, meaning that you are constantly playing the briefcase game from Resident Evil 4 whenever you switch out armor. But in this game, it's dog and you have 108 Leon Kennedys to look after. The rune skills don't tell you what they do, meaning you have to test them out, but since they're limited use, you then have to rest at an inn to replenish them, which is dumb. In the exploration section of the game, everyone's shadow is just a squashed version of their character sprite that's been decolored. It doesn't even move or change when you change direction, it's static. The last 2 are spoilers, by the way. So Flick, you know the blue guy, he joins your retinue at some point in the game, and then the game shifts to 3 months later where there is a cutscene and Flick demands to know where Odessa is. The dude waited 3 months to ask where his girlfriend is. There should be a limit to how bad of a boyfriend you can be, surely. I killed my dad and was rewarded with a unique level up scene, removing any gravitas from the story and reinforcing my theory of this just being a phone game, honestly. So that's it. Suikoden 1 didn't really set the world on fire when it was released, and it definitely doesn't hold up. I wonder how Suikoden 2 would be. If you believe my opinions to be fantastic, please like the video. If you think they're fantastically awful, please like and subscribe, because my next video will be even worse. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time. Ciao.